What's going on, guys? I gotta keep it quick. My kids are in the other room and they're probably gonna barge in any time. So in this video, I'm gonna get into AMD and Sofi stock. Their earnings is coming up today. We're gonna look over the numbers and we're also gonna look over the technicals here. So let's get right into this. And first off, if you don't mind hitting the like, subscribe, and notification bell. I put out daily videos, yada yada yada. Let's go. But first off, you'll see that the market is relatively mixed. We've definitely got quite a bit of red, but we do have a few names that are green. We've got Tesla continuing higher. But let me know in the comments below if you think Tesla is gonna come to 1,000 or not. It is definitely pushing towards it. But you know, we've also got a lot of stocks doing a whole lot of nothing. We've got Amazon pretty much 0%, Google flat, Apple flat. But you know, a lot of the names I cover, you know, the Bingos, the Workhorses, the Clean Sparks, the Charge Points, the Indies, they are running pretty nicely. Some better than others, of course, but you know, it's nice to see something like Bingo doing an 11.5% day when, you know, a lot of the rest of the market's doing nothing. So our small caps starting to get their run. You know, they were the first to fall. If you guys remember, in 2021, small caps did a whole lot of nothing, you know, and they get the least coverage by the market. So a lot of people really don't know that. And you also got to think, you know, these small caps, they're probably going to be the first to recover. And so far, it seems like it's true. You know, May 11 has been the low, and since then, a lot of those stocks have come up almost double, if not more. But let's look at AMD and Sofi. I'm definitely rambling on. Now, first off, looking at AMD, you'll see that it has been pushing higher, and it's actually been continuing to create recent highs coming up to earnings. So that is crazy. Definitely be careful, guys, because while I do expect earnings to come out pretty good and things to be positive, it's very possible they aren't, and this causes a huge dump. So if you know me, you know I definitely like to watch out for those breakouts for AMD. And you'll see back here that when it broke out of 80, it just went on an absolute run. And the next breakout, you know, looking back, you definitely want to play any kind of pullback when it breaks out of that pullback, comes back to that recent top and pushes farther. Now, we recently just did that. However, I really don't think it's got a lot of room to push. We will see how the day ends, but we are starting to break out of our recent high. But do be aware, you know, with earnings coming up, I wouldn't really think about trying to scalp this one. That being said, we'll see where it goes. I think it's going to find resistance at 100. I could be wrong. You got to keep earnings in mind, you know. Sometimes things can definitely continue to push, get a huge move on a breakout, but when there's potential positive or negative catalysts, you know, you got to be aware of that. Now, when I look at AMD long term, I still see it under $100 as a great time to add. You know, even in the really low hundreds, up to 110 maybe, I probably wouldn't necessarily add there. You know, I was adding in the 80s. I've gotten out of this. I kind of wish I didn't sold because I could easily see this pushing past 100 if earnings comes out good. And I could also see it breaking, you know, breaking down if earnings comes up good. It's very crazy how the market's been lately. You know, bad news is good news is bad news. Now let's look over AMD's earnings and see how they've actually done in recent history and what they're expecting. Now look at what they're expecting today to report is 6.5 billion in revenue. They're expecting a little over $1 EPS. That is a lower EPS than last quarter. However, that is a nice increase from almost 6 billion actually reported to 6.5 billion. So, you know, they're continuing to grow. Now looking back a bit, you'll see the earnings report October was 4.3 billion, you know, and now you're talking about a 50%, almost, I mean, that's not the August quarter, but very close. You're talking about a almost 50% year-over-year increase in AMD in terms of revenue. I think they're going to continue to grow, maybe not at that pace. The bigger you get, the harder it is to grow at that exponential rate. But, you know, having said that, I definitely am very bullish on AMD, and I could easily see this, you know, easily pushing 150. It already broke Intel in terms of market cap, and I think the media also is kind of pushing that narrative and letting it be known, kind of. I mean, literally the first thing that pops up here, AMD passes Intel in market cap. You know, we'll see if they continue to push this story. But I think this is also part of what has been pushing it to run. You know, when Wall Street sees something performing better, they love to pile in, you know, to that momentum. They love to pile into the thing that's doing so good. And you can argue whether that's the smart thing or not. You know, you can definitely play the stock market different ways. You can ride momentum, you can buy dips, you can just be a long-term investor, you can literally just scalp breakouts. You know, there are definitely a million ways to skin a cat, but keep an eye on their earnings. It's gonna be coming out after the bell here today as of this upload. And let's look at Sofi, look at the chart, and also look at their earnings, and I'm gonna give you what I expect. Now, first off, for their revenue expectation, you're looking at almost 350 million. Now, when you look year over year, their August reported quarter was actually 231 million. That's definitely a nice increase. And they're still not expected to be profitable, still a negative 10-cent EPS. Pretty much right in line with what they've been doing, but of course you can adjust that depending on how much shares you dilute. Because think about this, if you're a negative 50-cent EPS, you introduce a bunch more shares, you know, that negative EPS gets spread throughout more shares. So if you doubled your share count, that negative EPS would be theoretically 25 cents, negative 25 cents EPS. So that's one thing you got to think about with EPS, and it's the same, you know, if it's a positive EPS, and if you introduce a bunch of shares and say you're a positive 50-cent EPS, well, you introduce a bunch of shares and you have to spread that EPS throughout them. So say you have 100,000 shares with a 50-cent EPS, now you have 200,000 shares, well, that EPS per share is going to be 25 cents, right? So that's one thing you got to think about, with EPS. It can definitely be a little bit misleading. That's one thing you got to think about. Now, one thing I really want to point out that I actually really like about SoFi is it didn't break its May 11 lows. And if you're familiar with this channel, you know that I talk about that a lot. That a lot of these stocks have hit their lows on May 11. It's up to debate if they will break those lows, come test them again, or what have you. However, I do think the bottom is priced in here. Could be wrong, of course. That being said, if we do approach these levels, I'm going to be a serious buyer for a majority of these small caps that I talk about at those May 11 lows. But it's definitely very encouraging to see that SoFi has been continuing higher, hasn't created new lows since May 11. That's, it's been a couple months now. Now, I would keep an eye on this ascending channel here. And for SoFi to actually break out and push higher, it needs to break 715. You can definitely play that on a breakout. And one thing you got to be aware of, if earnings misses, if this does break, if this breaks this upward channel here, very likely our next support is either going to be at $6, psychological number, or it's going to come all the way down to about 581. That's the next place I see as a potential support that SoFi could jump off of if the earnings doesn't go as expected, or if it does go as expected, but the market just doesn't take it the way you might want. Now, I personally don't have SoFi. I did have a position, sold for a small profit, and I also don't have AMD. If I was to pick one of these to buy here, I am very, very heavy in small caps, so I would definitely be looking at AMD. My preference would be more towards AMD, but that's just because of the simple fact that I am definitely overextended in small caps. But thanks so much for watching, guys, and let me know in the comments below if you're watching SoFi or AMD, and what do you expect for their earnings? Now, AMD, I definitely expect pretty good things. The recent acquisition of Xilinx should help them out a bit, and as you may know, I'm very bullish on the semiconductor space in general, for the long term. They do expect a compound annual growth rate somewhere around 56%, and SoFi is quite compelling too. If I was to go into fintech, that would be my pick. Like I've said, I've traded in and out of it, and I am just watching it at this point. I'm waiting for earnings to see how it goes, and then see if the momentum continues or if we break that trend that I showed you. But thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and take it easy.